Good evening, friends. Well, it's Friday once again, and I'm back with another tale from my collection. Now it's time to grab a snack, dim the lights, and let me take you into the night with a story I call I Was a Soldier, Now I'm a Zombie. The thwopping sound of helicopter rotor blades filled the sky above him as the warbirds circled to provide cover. All around, the sound of weapons fire echoed. It was easy to distinguish the rattling fire of the AK-47s from the rapid thumping of the squad automatic weapons and the crisp sound of the M4 carbines. But determining the location of the fire was difficult within the adobe walls of the village. David crouched by the stone wall, waiting for the rest of his squad to catch up as he scanned rooftops and windows of nearby buildings. They were only a moment behind him, but time ceased to have meaning as minutes stretched to hours and hours passed as minutes. His senses were tuned to a high state of awareness where even the slightest little sound or movement caught his attention. The morning had started like any other day since he was in country. Coming off a 6-hour shift of guard duty on the roof of their forward observation post, he was just getting ready to grab some breakfast when the sound of rocket-propelled grenades and machine gun fire erupted outside. Quickly stuffing a sandwich in his mouth, he donned his helmet, grabbed his weapon, and ran up the stairway to the rooftop with everyone else. The platoon sergeant was at the top of the stairs, barking orders, and directed him to a fighting position on the northeast corner of the roof. The position consisted of sandbags stacked rows deep against the parapet wall to provide protection from enemy fire. Looking at the little village across the field, about 200 meters away, he scanned the buildings for signs of the enemy. He could see several vehicles moving in the village as they passed by gaps between the buildings, but there was no sign of the insurgents who fired on them. "What's the situation?" David yelled to anyone who cared to answer and looked to the other fighting positions. The rest of his platoon was lined up along the edges of the roof as he was, waiting for contact. "A couple of trucks full of guys came up fast out of the south and laid down cover fire as they rolled by," said Sergeant Murphy, the second squad leader. "We were just getting settled into the watch, and there they were. They advanced into the village." Near the stairs, David could hear the platoon sergeant, Sergeant First Class Davis, calling to headquarters on the radio to update their situation report and ask for support. A shot rang out beside him, and he looked out to see one of the insurgents fall between some buildings as several more trucks sped into the village from the west. It was obvious they were trying to regain a foothold in the town after being driven out a few weeks before. The village was located near a highway used by the enemy as a supply route, and the presence of coalition forces prevented this. "All right, you guys," Sergeant Davis called out. "We're going to hold here until reinforcements arrive, and then clear out that village. For now, just keep a sharp eye and take 'em out if you see 'em." David heard the crack of several rounds, followed by the reports of an AK-47 firing, and scanned the buildings ahead. Several insurgents had made it to the roofs in the village and were starting to open fire. He could hear bullets hitting the stone walls of their outpost below. Steadying his weapon on the sandbags, he aimed and began to fire as targets presented. He was joined by the others as the roar of rapid gunfire filled the air. It seemed as though hours had passed trading fire with the enemy when the thunderous sound of a 50 cal opened up just below him. Large chunks of mortar began to fly as the big rounds punched through the walls of the village roofs, and David looked down to see a Humvee parked at the corner of their building, firing away. The gunner in the turret seemed oblivious to their presence as he fired. "Jones, Murphy, take your teams and start advancing toward the village. Sweep and clear," Sergeant First Class Davis said as he popped the pin on a smoke grenade and threw it out in the courtyard below, followed by a second just beyond the walls. "The rest of you, provide cover fire." David turned to find his team and directed them to follow him. Murphy and his team followed immediately. In moments, they were exiting the building and making their way across the field toward the village. It was then that the choppers showed up and began to rake the roofs clear of any enemy combatants. Gaining the cover of the buildings, both teams made their way with no resistance to the first street. Stopping at the corner of the building, David instructed one of his men to take out the enemy vehicles with grenades from the M203 mounted on his weapon. The soldier moved forward a bit and shouldered his weapon. Thump! Came the sound of the grenade launcher, followed by the detonation of the truck furthest from them. He reloaded and continued to fire until all the vehicles were reduced to flaming wreckage. Advancing to the entrance of the first house, David kept his eyes on the windows for any signs of the enemy. Reaching the door, his team stacked up and prepared to enter. He gave the command to breach, and as the door flew open, the first man rushed inside and right, sweeping his weapon across his field of view. The next man in went left, followed by David and the last man covering the rest of the room. "Clear right," the first man called out. "Clear left," another man replied. "Room clear," David shouted. They moved through the rooms of the first floor one at a time, clearing them before advancing to the stairs of the second level. In the first room of the second floor, they found a family huddled together in a corner. It was obvious they were scared, and David threw them a wave as he exited after clearing the room. At the stairway to the roof, David instructed one man to check the roof but not go onto it, as insurgents on nearby roofs would see him. If there was contact, the others would follow him. He waited until the man opened the door and reported back that it was clear before turning to exit the building and wait for his men in the courtyard. Looking at the Humvee parked in the street outside the villa, he gave a nod to the soldier manning the 50 cal in the turret. The machine gunner was there to keep the streets clear while David and his team cleared the buildings of any insurgents. He glanced back at the building to see his men moving rapidly to his position. David stood from his position by the stone wall and led his men to the next house down the street. As they drew near, Murphy and his men emerged and signaled the house was clear. He passed this house for the next in line and stopped outside the front gate to get a good look at the courtyard before entering. He could see no one from his position, so he dashed across the opening to the other side and looked back at the opposite side of the courtyard. When he was confident it was clear, they advanced. Stacking up at the door, his team breached and rushed forward to be met by gunfire as several AK-47s opened up on full automatic fire from the shadows, slamming him in the chest with multiple rounds. David woke with a start and looked around as he tried to catch his breath. He was in his apartment and not in a coffin or back on the battlefield. He rolled over on his bunk and lit a cigarette, watching the smoke rise in little curls toward the ceiling. He wondered what had become of his friends on that mission where he lost his life. Did they make it? He laid back and stared at the ceiling until the need to feed intruded on his thoughts. Getting up, he stretched and headed out to the cavern where he would meet his friends before going to eat. A couple others were there already, and he nodded to them as he took a chair and waited for the rest. Shortly after escaping from his grave, David found himself feeling very weak with a massive headache. He knew he needed to eat and drink. Stumbling across the cemetery, he caught the delicious smell of roasting meat and followed it to a hobo camp under a nearby railroad trestle. There was a campfire there with meat roasting on a stick. There was no one around, so he helped himself, pulling a chunk from the meat and eating it greedily. That was a mistake. Within moments of eating the meat and drinking some water from a bottle lying nearby, his stomach began to cramp worse than anything he had ever felt, and this compounded his headache. Laying on the ground, clutching his stomach, he didn't even notice when the owner of the camp returned. The man grabbed his arm and rolled him over as he began to yell at him for being a thief, but David wasn't listening. He could smell the man's blood, and it drove him to madness. As he was pulled into a sitting position, he reached out and pulled the man to him. His teeth tore into the man's throat, and he drank deeply of the hot, sweet blood. A tingling sensation filled his mouth and throat all the way down to his stomach, and suddenly he was energized. The cramps and headache went away immediately. He continued to feed on the man's flesh until he was satisfied and pushed the corpse into the fire before running back into the night. He found an open mausoleum in the cemetery where he stayed until the need to hunt rose again. David continued hunting at the edge of the cemetery near the old railroad trestle. It was a place where bums and hobos hung out to rest and eat as they passed through the town on the trains. It was a good place to hunt because no one would miss those people. Obviously, his old high school friend Bobby thought so too, because one night after making his kill, David heard someone running toward him and looked up to see Bobby about to attack. They recognized each other in the moonlight at the last second. It was a good reunion, and after sharing the meal, Bobby brought him to the lair. He knew he could never go home, as no one would understand his need to feed on the living. So he settled in and began teaching the others what he learned in the army. Footsteps interrupted his thoughts, and he looked up to see Bobby approaching with Quentin, another old friend from high school who had not yet become one of them. "David here's a real hero," Bobby Joe said. "He was a soldier over in Afghanistan, and he took a few rounds to save his buddies. You might remember seeing in the paper when they sent him home a few months ago. He was buried with full military honors. Show him your wounds, David." David lifted his shirt, and Quentin could only stare at the line of red-rimmed purple holes across his chest. They had healed over, but it still looked bad. "I feel for you, dude," Quentin said. "Don't sweat it, man," David said. "It happened so fast I never even felt it. Just woke up confused in my coffin. At first I thought I might have been captured by the Hajis and was being held hostage. It wasn't until after I got above ground and read the local newspaper that I figured out what happened to me. Then I met Bobby Joe at the graveyard, and here I am." Bobby motioned for Quentin to take a chair with the others around the fire and stepped to the front of the room. He took a small Bible out of his back pocket and held it up in front of them so they could see what it was. "I have been to the void and stared into the eternal darkness which knows no boundaries." Bobby's voice now boomed in the cavern. "I searched for God and found only my own thoughts. I prayed for the light and heard only the echoes of my terrified screams resounding in the endless black. That is when I found the truth. The truth that men created God to give themselves purpose when there was no purpose. To say God has a plan for everyone gives reason for allowing the weak to survive to fulfill their unknown purpose, when in reality, their purpose has been defied as the strong are denied that which is their right. Life is chaos in a test tube screaming for organization because organization lends purpose." Bobby emphasized the next words. "Life without purpose is meaningless." The others clapped and cheered as Bobby lowered his head for a moment. When he looked up, he was looking directly at Quentin. "Yea, I say to you, lay up your treasures here on earth, for there is no heaven, no hell, no afterlife, except that which you make for yourselves." He paused and gazed slowly around as if looking deeply into each person's eyes for the spark of understanding. "In the blackness of the void, there is nothing, no light, no others, only endless time and crystal clarity. You will remember every moment of your lives and relive them over and over for eternity, recalling each detail as clearly as if you had stopped and studied them in great depth in the moment. Such is the power of the human mind that it collects everything it sees, feels, and hears, though we scarcely notice as we scurry from moment to pointless moment throughout our lives, rushing to the void. Emotion is man's greatest downfall. Emotion allows the weak to survive and propagate because empathy means live and let live. In lower organisms, this is not true, and only the strong survive because natural order dictates that survival is dependent upon purpose, and the weak cannot fulfill any other purpose than to be food for the strong. In his quest for knowledge, man has perverted natural order. In his pathetic pursuit of continued life, men looked outward toward those things which could end life and found ways to defeat them. When the predator was strong, men made weapons. When the weather was too severe, men made shelter. When the strong would overcome the weak, men made laws to protect them. And when the smallest, most ferocious forms of life on the planet were all that remained, men invented science and medicine. But natural order will always triumph, and we are standing at the dawn of a new age. Bobby tossed the Bible into the fire with a flourish and watched as embers rose and drifted around them. Natural order has dictated that men create something which removes all of the boundaries by exposing the lies of religion, the weakness of emotion, and the futility of life. In the end, natural order has ensured that only the strong will survive. What would men be now if science and medicine were not discovered? Before medicine, men became sick and either died or incorporated the attacking disease. This resulted in continued life for both the disease and man. But emotions, sparked by the loss of fellow weak men, created medicine to prolong life and denied disease the right to exist. How strong would men be today, 500 years after the beginnings of medicine, if only the strong had survived until now? "Hoo-yah!" David said. Quentin looked around at the other men and saw they were building up into a frenzy. Somewhere deep inside, fear began to gnaw at him as he wondered what Bobby was leading them to. He himself was unlike the others, and this frightened him more than anything. "Will you spend eternity regretting each and every time you denied your desires in this life?" Bobby asked. "No!" they all shouted. "Will you fulfill your purpose and take your place among the strong?" Bobby asked. "Hell yeah!" they shouted back to him. "And you, Quentin," Bobby pointed to him, "will you join us, or will you merely be food for the strong?" Quentin felt his heart freeze with fear. What did Bobby mean, food for the strong? Would they actually kill him and eat him if he didn't join them? What would he have to do to join them? "I'm with you, Bobby," Quentin said loudly. "Then let the feast begin," Bobby Joe yelled and raised his fists to the air. The others jumped up from their chairs and gathered around Quentin to welcome him as part of the group. He shook their hands and smiled back at him. But inside, he wondered what was to come next. He watched as they went to the cot at the back of the room and uncovered a man lying there. The others grabbed the man from the cot and were leading him toward the cave at the rear. Bobby Joe followed them, indicating Quentin should come too. Following closely, Quentin studied the dim caves and committed them to memory. Clearly, Bobby Joe and the others were out of their minds, and he would need to find a way to escape if he wanted to survive. They walked through a series of passageways until the walls became dirt shored back with timber. It seemed they had walked for 15 minutes or so when they came to another door, which opened into an apartment similar to the one Bobby had first showed him. The bound man was struggling harder to get away now, but it was no use. With 4 of them restraining him, he had no chance to escape. He was led to a room resembling a kitchen, and Quentin wondered what was about to happen. He recalled Bobby Joe's speech about the weak being food for the strong and felt his stomach turn. The room was large, to allow plenty of room to work, and he stood back against a wall to watch. Moving quickly, they undressed the man and laid him on a large silver table in the middle of the room. The sides of the table were raised, and he recognized it as the same type used by hospitals and mortuaries for processing cadavers. The raised sides kept the fluids from running on the floor while the work was performed. A small hose ran from a drain on the table to a floor drain. Bobby Joe grabbed a water hose from the sink while the others chained the man to the table and began to hose him down. As the water flowed over him and onto the table, Quentin saw it was running into the floor drain. After a few minutes, Bobby Joe laid the hose down and stepped back while James approached with a large knife. The knife glinted in the light, casting a flickering ray across the man's face, and he tried to scream through the gag. Then the bitter, acrid smell of urine filled the air as he began pissing all over himself, and Quentin heard a couple of the others moan. "Ah, damn it, Rory," Billy said in frustration. "Couldn't you have at least held it till you were dead?" The others laughed loudly at this comment, and Quentin pushed himself tighter to the wall behind him. "Hold on while I wash him down again, James," Bobby Joe said, grabbing the hose. "I prefer not to have my meat seasoned with piss." Bobby Joe finished hosing him down, and James stepped up once again with the knife. Laying the knife on the table, he grabbed a leather strap and wrapped it around the top of the nearest thigh to make a tourniquet. He pulled it tight and added a twist with a small piece of wood. "That should keep you from bleeding to death before I'm through with you," James said and patted the thigh. "White meat or dark meat, fellas?" The guy on the table became more frantic now, bucking against the restraints and twisting around. "It'll be hard to get a good clean cut with him moving around like this, you guys. Would someone care to subdue him?" James asked. Wayne stepped closer to the table and grabbed one of the man's arms. Leaning close, he opened his mouth to expose his fangs and plunged them into the wrist. With a quick twist of his head, the punctures transformed into rips, and he began to suck greedily at the flowing blood. The man writhed and jerked his arm in an attempt to get away, but Wayne held on until his efforts became weak. He pulled back from the arm, grabbing a leather strap, and put a tight tourniquet just above the holes in the wrist. A small amount of blood pooled at the wounds, but there was no chance he would bleed out. Quentin looked at Wayne. Now that he had fed on fresh blood, he was smiling and leaning back against the wall, licking his lips as if he were high or something. Obviously, he had enjoyed it. His own stomach was beginning to twist into knots at the thought of drinking blood, and he felt as though he had stepped into a surreal nightmare. This was not who he was. He did not want to torture and kill people. But on the other hand, he did not want to be tortured and killed either. He forced himself to be calm and wait for a chance to be away from all of this. "Much better," James said. "Thank you, Wayne." "My pleasure," Wayne said in an oddly thick tone. Grabbing the knife again, James made a series of slow, deliberate cuts across the thigh down to the bone. Each cut was accomplished by a muted scream from behind the gag of his subject. Then, with a practiced hand, he slipped the knife into the first cut near the knee and turned it to cut flat against the bone, almost all the way back up to the tourniquet, as if filleting a fish. High-pitched screams were muted by the gag, but there was no mistaking the sounds, as large slices of flesh fell from the thigh like steaks. He grabbed the thick steaks and tossed them onto the man's stomach, even as the victim watched with his eyes bulging. As the others greedily grabbed at the chunks of raw flesh and began to eat them, Quentin knew he could stand no more. Blackness began to creep into the corners of his vision, and he became weak. He tried to fight the sensation, but there was no stopping it, and he blacked out. Thank you for spending your time with me. Tell me what you think in the comments, and I'll be sure to join the conversation. Soldier Zombie was excerpted from my book, The Void. Some graphic parts were edited for community standards. Want to know the rest of the story? It's available with all my books on Amazon.com. Links are in the description below. That's all for tonight, but I'll be back again next Friday with another tale, just for you. Until then, sleep well.